Plus qui est lui, avec son corps en vue de l'ennemi, et qui veut profiter de le camp dont battait au rang, comme disait l'Allemand, il a don. C'est la bataille de pour tous qui est censé être une grande victoire, mais qui en mon avis ne l'est pas du tout. Nous autres prêtres avons, comme vous savez, un très vilain habitude de décider du gain ou de la perte d'une bataille. Celui qui s'est retiré après la bataille l'a perdu. Voilà ce que nous disons et nous avons perdu la bataille de Putsk. Bref, nous nous retirons après la bataille, mais nous envoyons un courrier à Pétersbourg qui porte les nouvelles d'une victoire. Et les généraux ne décident pas le commandant en chef à Bukshevden, espérant recevoir de Pétersbourg une reconnaissance de sa victoire, le titre de général en chef. Pendant ces entraînements, nous commençons un plan de manœuvres excessivement intéressants et originaux. Notre but ne consiste pas, comme il devrait l'être, à avertir ou à attaquer l'ennemi, mais uniquement avec les généraux Bukshevden qui perdront d'enchaîner serait notre chef. Nous poursuivons ce but avec tant d'énergie qui met en passant une rivière qui n'est pas belle. Nous brûlons les ponts pour nous séparer de notre ennemi qui pour le moment n'est pas Bonaparte, mais Bukshevden. Le général Bukshevden a manqué d'être attaqué et pris par des forces ennemies supérieures à cause d'une de nos belles manœuvres qui nous sauvait de lui. Bukshevden nous poursuit, nous filons. À peine passe-t-il de notre côte de la rivière que nous repassons de l'autre. À la fin, notre ennemi Bukshevden nous attrapait et s'attaque à nous. Les deux généraux s'affachent. Il y a même une provocation en de la part de Bukshevden et une attaque d'épilepsie de la part de Bennigsen. Mais au moment critique, le courrier qui porte la nouvelle de notre victoire de Pultos nous apporte de Pétersbourg notre nomination de général en chef et le premier ennemi Bukshevden est renforcé. Nous pouvons penser à ce qu'on a Bonaparte, mais ne voilà-t-il pas qu'à ce moment s'élevait devant nous un trousseau ennemi? C'est l'Orthodox Armed Forces qui demandait à grands cris du pain de l'avion des oreilles du fond qu'essayait. Les magasins sont vides, les chemins impraticables. Les Orthodox Armed Forces se mettent à la morale et d'une manière dont la dernière campagne ne peut vous donner la moindre idée. La moitié des régiments formés de troupes libres qui parcourent leur contrée en mettant tout à feu et en sang. Les habitants sont ruinés, des fonds incomblés, les hôpitaux regorgeant de malades et la disette est partout. Des fois, les quartiers généraux a été attaqué par des troupes de Morador et le général en chef a obligé l'homme de demander un bataillon pour la chasser. Dans une de ces attaques, un mot importé, ma mère vie et ma robe de chambre. L'empereur veut donner droit à tous les chefs de division de fusiller les maraudeurs, mais je crains fort que cela n'oblige un moteur de l'armée de fusiller l'autre.
Prince Andrei began by reading with his eyes alone, but then involuntarily, though he knew how far Bilbin was to be trusted, became more and more interested in what he was reading. Having read to this point, he crumpled the letter and threw it down. It was not what he read in the letter that made him angry. What made him angry was that the life there, now foreign to him, could excite him. He closed his eyes, rubbed his forehead with his hand, as if driving away all concern for what he had read, and began listening to what was happening in the nursery. Suddenly, he seemed to hear some strange noise behind the door. A fear came over him. He was afraid something had happened to the baby while he was reading the letter. He tiptoed to the door of the nursery and opened it. The moment he went in, he saw that the nanny was hiding something from him with a frightened look, that Princess Marya was no longer by the crib. "My friend," he heard behind him, what sounded like the desperate whisper of Princess Marya. As often happens after long sleeplessness and long anxiety, a groundless fear came over him. It occurred to him that the baby had died. Everything he saw and heard seemed to him to confirm this fear. It's all over, he thought, and cold sweat broke out on his forehead. Bewildered, he went over to the crib, certain that he would find it empty, that the nanny was hiding the dead baby. He opened the curtain for a time. His frightened, unfocused eyes could not find the baby. At last he saw him. The red-cheeked boy lay sprawled across the crib, his head lower than the pillow, smacking, moving his lips in his sleep, and breathing regularly. Prince Andrei, on seeing the boy, was as glad as if he had already lost him. He bent down, as his sister had taught him, tested with his lips whether the baby had a fever. The tender forehead was moist. He touched his head with his hand. Even the hair was wet. The baby had sweated so much. Not only had he yet not died, but it was obvious now that the crisis was past and that he was getting well. Prince Andrei wanted to snatch up, to squeeze, to clutch to his heart this helpless little being. He did not dare to do it. He stood over him, gazed at his head, his arms, his legs outlined under the blanket. He heard a rustling beside him, and some shadow appeared under the canopy of the crib. He did not turn, and gazing at the baby's face, kept listening to his regular breathing. The dark shadow was Princess Marya, who had come over to the crib with inaudible steps, raised the canopy, and lowered it behind her. Prince Andrei recognized her without turning to look, and reached his hands toward her. She pressed his hand. "He's been sweating," said Prince Andrei. "I was coming to tell you that." The baby stirred slightly in his sleep, smiled, and rubbed his forehead against the pillow. Prince Andrei looked at his sister. Princess Marya's luminous eyes in the dim half-light of the canopy glistened more than usual from the happy tears that welled up in them. Prince Marya leaned toward her brother and kissed him, catching slightly on the canopy of the crib. They shook their fingers at each other and stood a little longer in the dim light of the canopy, as if reluctant to part with the world in which the three of them were separated from everything on earth. Prince Andrei was the first to leave the crib, his hair tangling in the muslin of the canopy. "Yes, this is the one thing left to me now," he said with a sigh. Soon after he was received into the Brotherhood of the Masons, Pierre left for the province of Kiev, where the greater part of his peasants were, with a full set of instructions he had written out for himself about what he was to do on his estate. On reaching Kiev, Pierre summoned all his stewards to the main office and explained his intentions and wishes to them. He told them that measures would immediately be taken for the complete liberation of the peasants from bondage, that meanwhile the peasants should not be overburdened with work, that women with children should not be sent to work, that the peasants should be given assistance, that punishments should be administered hortatorially, not corporeally, that there should be hospitals, almshouses, and schools in each village. Some of the stewards, there were half-literate managers among them, listened fearfully, taking what he said to imply that the young count was displeased with their stewardship and their concealing of money. Others, after the first fright, were amused by Pierre's lisp and the new words they had never heard before. A third group simply took pleasure in hearing how the master spoke. A fourth group, the most intelligent, the head steward among them, understood from his speech how they ought to treat the master in order to achieve their own aims. The head steward expressed great sympathy with Pierre's intention, but he observed that, besides these transformations, it was generally necessary to take care of things which were in a bad state. Despite Count Bezukov's enormous wealth, ever since Pierre had received it, and he received, so it was said, a yearly income of 500,000, he had felt himself much less rich than when he had received his 10,000 from the late count. In general terms, he was vaguely aware of the following budget. Around 80,000 was paid to the council for all the estates, around 30,000 went to the upkeep of the suburban Moscow estate, the Moscow house, and the princesses. Around 15,000 was distributed in pensions and the same amount to charitable institutions. 150,000 was sent to the countess for her expenses. Around 70,000 was paid as interest on debts. The building of a new church, already begun, had been costing around 10,000 over the past 2 years. The rest, around 100,000, got spent. He did not know how himself, and he was obliged to borrow almost every year. Besides that, every year the head steward wrote now about fires, now about poor harvests, now about the necessity of rebuilding mills and factories. And so the first thing facing Pierre was that for which he had least ability or inclination, business matters. Every day Pierre busied himself with his head steward, but he felt that his busying did not move things one step forward. He felt that his busying went on independently of things, that it did not mess with things and did not make them move. On the one hand, the head steward, presenting things in the worst light, showed Pierre the necessity of paying off debts and undertaking new works using serf labor, to which Pierre would not agree. On the other hand, Pierre demanded a start to the business of liberation, against which the steward advanced the necessity of first paying the debt to the trust council, and hence the impossibility of a speedy liberation. The steward did not say it was completely impossible to achieve that goal. He suggested selling the woodlands in the Kostroma province, selling the bottomlands and the Crimean estate. But all these operations, as the steward spoke of them, became bound up with such complexity of processes, of lifting prohibitions, requesting permissions, and so on, that Pierre was at a loss and only said to him, "Yes, yes, do that." Pierre did not have the practical tenacity that would have given him the possibility of undertaking the business directly, and therefore he did not like it, and only tried to pretend to the steward that he was occupied with it. And the steward tried to pretend that to the count that he considered this occupation quite useful for the master and inconvenient for himself. In the big town, acquaintances turned up. Strangers hastened to make the acquaintance and greet cordially the newly arrived rich man, the biggest proprietor in the province. Temptations in connection with Pierre's main weakness, the one he had confessed when he was being received into the lodge, were also so strong that Pierre could not resist them. Again, whole days, weeks, months of Pierre's life passed busily taken up with soirees, dinners, lunches, balls, giving him no time to recover his senses, just as in Petersburg. Instead of the new life Pierre had hoped to lead, he still lived the same life as before, only in different surroundings. Of the 3 precepts of masonry, Pierre realized that he was not fulfilling the one which required every mason to be an example of the moral life, and of the 7 virtues he was totally lacking in 2, good character and the love of death. He comforted himself by thinking that he was fulfilling another duty instead, the setting to rights of the human race, and had other virtues, love of his neighbor, and especially generosity. In the spring of 1807, Pierre decided to go back to Petersburg. On the way back, he intended to visit all all his estates and personally ascertain what of all he had prescribed had been done and what the situation now was of the people whom God had entrusted to him and whose benefactor he was trying to be. The steward, who considered all the count's ventures near madness, unprofitable for himself, for Pierre, and for the peasants, made concessions. Continuing to present the business of emancipation as impossible, he ordered the construction of large buildings for schools, hospitals, and almshouses on all the estates, had receptions prepared everywhere for the master's arrival, not sumptuously festive, which he knew Pierre would not like, but of religious thanksgiving with icons and bread and salt, precisely such as would impress and deceive the master as he understood him. The southern spring, the comfortable quick travel in a Viennese carriage, and the solitude on the way worked joyfully on Pierre. The estates he had not yet been to were one more picturesque than the others. The people everywhere seemed preposterous and touchingly grateful for the benefactions he had done them. Everywhere there were welcomes which, though they sometimes embarrassed Pierre, at the bottom of his heart called up a joyful feeling in him. In one place the peasants offered him bread and salt in the icon of Peter and Paul, and asked his permission in honor of the patron saints Peter and Paul, as a sign of love and gratitude for his benefactions, to build a new chapel in the church at their own expense. In another place he was met by a woman with nursing babies, who thanked him for their deliverance from hard work. On a Thursday he was met by the priest with a cross, surrounded by children whom, thanks to the count, he was instructing in reading, writing, and religion. On all the estates Pierre saw with his own eyes stone buildings under construction and already constructed according to the same plan, to serve as hospitals, schools, and almshouses, which were to be opened in a short time. Everywhere Pierre saw the steward's reports on the reduction of the corvée compared to previous norms, and heard touching thanks for it from deputations of peasants in blue caftans. Pierre did not know that the village where he was offered bread and salt and where a chapel of Peter and Paul was being built was a market village with a fair on St. Peter's Day, that the chapel had been begun long ago by the wealthy peasants, who were the ones that welcomed him, and that 9/10 of the peasants in that village were completely destitute. He did not know that since on his orders women with nursing babies were no longer sent to do corvée, these same women had to do still harder work on their own land. He did not know that the priest who met him with the cross burdened the peasants with his exactions, and that the pupils gathered around him had been sent off with tears by their parents and were bought back for large sums of money. He did not know that the stone buildings were constructed to plan by his own workers and increased their corvée, which was only reduced on paper. He did not know that where a steward showed him in the books that the quitrent had been reduced by a third, as he had ordered, the corvée had been augmented by half, and therefore Pierre was delighted by his visits to the estates, and returned fully to that philanthropic state of mind in which he had left Petersburg, and wrote rapturous letters to his mentor brother, as he called the Grand Master. "How easy it is, how little effort it takes to do so much good," thought Pierre, "and how little we care about it." He was happy with the gratitude shown him, but ashamed as he received it. This gratitude reminded him how much more he could do for these simple good people. The steward, a very stupid but cunning man, understood the intelligent but naive count perfectly, and played with him as with a Tory. When he saw the effect these prearranged receptions had on Pierre, he addressed him more resolutely with arguments about the impossibility and above all the needlessness of emancipating the peasants, who were perfectly happy even without that. In his heart of hearts, Pierre agreed with the steward that it was hard to imagine happier people, and that God knows what awaited them in freedom. Yet Pierre insisted, albeit reluctantly, on what he considered right. The steward promised to put all his powers to use in fulfilling the count's will, clearly understanding that the count not only would never be able to check on whether all the measures had been taken for selling the woodlands and estates so as to pay off the council, but would probably never ask and never find out that the buildings constructed were standing empty, that the peasants went on giving in work and money all the peasants gave other masters, that is, all they could. 11. Returning from his southern journey in the happiest state of mind, Pierre carried out a long-standing intention of his to go and visit his friend Bolkonsky, whom he had not seen for 2 years. Having learned at the last posting station that Prince Andrei was not at Bald Hills but at his newly allotted estate, Pierre went to him there. Bogucharovo lay in flat, unattractive country covered with fields and first and second growth stands of fir and birch. The manor stood at the end of a village that stretched along the high road behind a newly dug well-filled pond, its banks not yet overgrown with grass, in the middle of a young woods, amidst which stood a few big pines. The manor consisted of a threshing floor, outbuildings, stables, a bathhouse, a cottage, and a big stone house with a semicircular facade, which was still under construction. Around the house, a young garden was planted. The fences were sturdy and new. Under a shed stood 2 fire hoses and a barrel painted green. The paths were straight, the bridges strong with handrails. Everything bore the stamp of neatness and efficiency. To the question of where the prince lived, some domestics he met pointed him to the small new cottage that stood just by the pond. Anton, Prince Andrei's old tutor, helped Pierre out of the carriage, said that the prince was not at home, and led him to a clean little front hall. Pierre was struck by the modesty of this small though clean house after those magnificent conditions in which he had last seen his friend in Petersburg. He went quickly into the little reception room, unplastered and still smelling of pine, and wanted to go further, but Anton ran ahead on tiptoe and knocked on the door. "Well, what is it?" came a sharp, unpleasant voice. "A visitor," replied Anton. "Ask him to wait." And there was the sound of a chair being moved. Pierre went up to the door with quick steps and ran face to face into the frowning and aged Prince Andrei, who was coming out to him. Pierre embraced him, and raising his spectacles, kissed him on the cheeks and looked at him close up. How unexpected! I am very glad, said Prince Andrei. Pierre said nothing. He looked at his friend in astonishment and could not take his eyes off him. He was struck by the change that had taken place in Prince Andrei. His words were affectionate. There was a smile on Prince Andrei's lips and face, but his gaze was extinguished, dead, and despite his obvious desire, Prince Andrei could not give it a joyful and merry luster. It was not that his friend had grown thinner, paler, more mature. It was that this gaze and the wrinkle on his forehead expressive of a long concentration on some one thing which struck and alienated Pierre until he got used to them. In this meeting, after long separation, as always happens, the conversation could not settle on anything for a long time. They asked and gave brief replies about things they knew should have been discussed at length. At last, the conversation gradually began to dwell on what had previously been said, in fragments on questions of past life, on plans for the future, on Pierre's journey, on his occupation, on the war, and so on. The concentration and dejection Pierre had noticed in Prince Andrei's eyes were now expressed still more strongly in the smile with which he listened to Pierre, especially when Pierre spoke with animated joy about his past or future. It was as if Prince Andrei would have liked to enter into what he was saying, but could not. Pierre was beginning to feel that raptures, dreams, hopes for happiness, and the good were improper in front of Prince Andrei. He was ashamed to voice all his new Masonic thoughts, especially renewed and stirred up in him by his last journey. He restrained himself. He was afraid of being naive. Along with that, he had an irrepressible desire to show his friend the more quickly that he was now quite a different, better Pierre than the one he had been in Petersburg. I can't tell you how much I've lived through in this time. I wouldn't recognize myself. Yes, we've changed very much since then, said Prince Andrei. Well, and you, asked Pierre, what are your plans? Plans, Prince Andrei repeated ironically. My plans, he repeated as if astonished at the meaning of such a word. As you see, I'm building. By next year I want to have removed completely. Pierre peered silently and intently into Andrei's aged face. No, I'm asking, said Pierre, but Prince Andrei interrupted him. Why talk about myself? You tell me about your journey, and all you did there on your estates. Pierre began telling about what he had done on the estates, trying as far as possible to hide his own share in the improvements he had made. Prince Andrei prompted Pierre beforehand several times on what he was telling, as if everything Pierre had done was a long-known story, and he listened not only without interest, but even as if ashamed at what Pierre was telling him. Pierre felt awkward and even oppressed in his friend's company. He fell silent. Well, the thing is, dear heart, said Prince Andrei, who obviously also felt oppressed and embarrassed with his visitor, I'm on bivouac here. I've just come to have a look, and tonight I'm going to my sister's. I'll introduce you to them, but it seems you know her, he said, obviously entertaining a visitor with whom he no longer felt anything in common. We'll go after dinner. And now, would you like to look over my estate? They went out and spent the time before dinner discussing political news and mutual acquaintances, like people who have little closeness to each other. Prince Andrei showed some animation and interest only when he talked about the new estate he was setting up in his construction projects. But here, too, in the midst of the conversation on the scaffolding, as Prince Andrei was describing to Pierre the future layout of the house, he suddenly stopped. However, there's nothing interesting in it. Let's have dinner and go. Over dinner, the conversation turned to Pierre's marriage. I was very surprised when I heard of it, said Prince Andrei. Pierre blushed, as he always blushed about that, and said hastily, Someday I'll tell you how it all happened, but you know it's all over and forever. Forever? Said Prince Andrei. Nothing is forever. But you do know how it all ended. You heard about the duel. Yes, you went through that too. The one thing I thank God for is that I didn't kill the man, said Pierre. Why so? Asked Prince Andrei. It's even very good to kill a vicious dog. No, to kill a man is bad. It's wrong. Why is it wrong? Prince Andrei repeated. It's not given to people to judge what's right or wrong. People have eternally been mistaken and will be mistaken, and in nothing more so than in what they consider right and wrong. What's evil for another person is wrong, said Pierre, pleased to feel that for the first time since his arrival, Prince Andrei was becoming animated and was beginning to talk and wanted to speak out everything that had made him the way he was now. But who has told you what's evil for another person? He asked. Evil? Evil, said Pierre. We all know what's evil for us. Yes, we know, but what I know is evil for myself, I cannot do to another person. Prince Andrei was speaking more and more animatedly, clearly wishing to voice his new view of things to Pierre. He spoke in French. Je n'ai comme honneur dans le qui vit qui de mon bien rire, c'est l'errement et la maladie. Il n'est de bien que l'absence de ces morts. I only know two very real evils in life, remorse and illness. The only good is the absence of these evils. To live for myself, only avoiding these two evils, that is all my wisdom now. And love of one's neighbor, and self-sacrifice, Pierre began. No, I can't agree with you. To live only so as not to do evil, so as not to repent, is too little. I used to live that way. I lived for myself, and I ruined my life, and only now, when I live, or at least try to live, Pierre corrected himself out of modesty, for others, only now have I understood all the happiness of life. No, I won't agree with you, and you don't really think what you're saying. Prince Andrei silently gazed at Pierre with a mocking smile. You'll be seeing my sister, Princess Marya. You'll get along well with her, he said. Maybe you're right for yourself, he went on after a brief pause. But each man lives his own way. You live for yourself and you say, with that you almost ruined your life, and knew happiness only when you began to live for others. But I experienced the opposite. I used to live for glory. What is glory? The same as love for others, the desire to do something for them, the desire for their praise. So I lived for others and ruined my life, and not almost but completely, and I've been at peace since I began living for myself alone. But how can you live for yourself alone? Asked Pierre, becoming heated. What about your son, your sister, your father? But they're the same as myself. They're not others, said Prince Andrei. And others, one's neighbors, les prochains, as you and Princess Maria call them, are the chief source of error and evil. Les prochains, that's those Kievan peasants of yours to whom you want to do good. And he gave Pierre a mockingly defiant look. He was clearly defying Pierre. You're joking, said Pierre, growing more and more animated. What error and evil can there be in my wish, though fulfilled very little and poorly, my wish to do good and my doing at least something? What evil can there be if those wretched people are peasants, people like us who grow up and die with no other notion of God and truth than an icon and a meaningless prayer, are taught comforting beliefs about the future life, retribution, reward, comfort? What evil and error are there if people are dying of diseases without any help when it's so easy to help them materially, and I give them a doctor and a hospital and a shelter for the aged? And isn't it a palpable and questionable good if a peasant or a woman with a baby has no peace day or night, and I give them rest and leisure? Said Pierre, hurrying and lisping. And I've done that, though poorly, though very little, but I've done something to that end, and you not only won't convince me that what I've done was not good, but you also won't convince me that you don't think so yourself. And above all, Pierre went on, this I know, and I know for certain, that the pleasure of doing good is the only certain happiness in life. Yes, if you put the question that way, it's another matter, said Prince Andrei. I build a house and cultivate a garden, and you build hospitals. Both can serve to pass the time. But what's right, what's good, that is for the one who knows all to judge, not for us. Well, you want to argue, he added, so let's argue. They left the table and sat on the porch, which took the place of a balcony. Well, let's argue then, said Prince Andrei. Schools, you say, he went on, raising a finger. Instruction, and so on. That is, you want to lead him out of his animal condition, he said, pointing to a muzhik who took off his hat as he passed by, and give him moral needs. But it seems to me that the only possible happiness is animal happiness, and you want to deprive him of it. I envy him, and you want to make him into me, but without giving him my intelligence or my feelings or my means. Second, you say lighten his work, but in my opinion, physical labor is as much a necessity for him, as much a condition of his existence, as mental labor is for you and me. You cannot not think. I go to bed past 2 o'clock. I have thoughts and can't sleep. I toss about. I don't fall asleep until morning because I'm thinking and cannot not think, as he cannot not plow or mow. Otherwise, I'll go to the pothouse or fall ill. Just as I could not stand his terrible physical labor and would die in a week, so he could not stand my physical idleness. He'd grow fat and die. Third, what was it you said? Prince Andrei raised a third finger. Ah, yes, hospitals, medicines. He has a stroke. He's dying. But you let his blood. You cure him, and he'll go around crippled for another 10 years. A burden on everyone. It's far more simple and easy for him to die. Others will be born. There are lots of them as it is. You might be sorry to lose an extra worker. That's how I look at him. But no, you want to cure him out of love for him. And he doesn't need that. Besides, what is this fantasy that medicine has ever cured anybody? Killed, yes, he said, frowning spitefully and turning away from Pierre. Prince Andrei spoke his mind so clearly and distinctly that it was evident he had thought about it more than once, and he spoke eagerly and quickly like a man who has not spoken for a long time. His gaze became the more animated, the more hopeless his opinions were. Oh, that's terrible, terrible, said Pierre. Only I don't understand how one can live with such thoughts. Such moments have come over me. It was not long ago in Moscow and on the road, but then I go so much to feed that I don't live. I find everything vile, above all myself. I don't eat, then don't wash. Well, how is it with you? Why don't you wash? It's not clean, said Prince Andrei. On the contrary, one must try to make one's life as pleasant as possible. I'm alive and it's not my fault, which means I must somehow go on living the best I can, without bothering anybody until I die. But what makes you live? Which such thoughts you'll sit without moving, without undertaking anything. Life won't leave one alone as it is. I'd be glad to do nothing. But then, on the one hand, the local nobility deem me worthy of being elected their marshal. I barely get out of it. They couldn't understand that I don't have what it takes. Don't have the sort of good-natured and bustling banality needed for it. Then there's this house, which had to be built so as to have a corner where I could be at peace. Now it's the militia. Why aren't you serving in the army? After Austerlitz, Prince Andrei said gloomily. No, I humbly thank you. I promised myself I would not serve in the active Russian army, and I won't. If Bonaparte was camped here in Smolensk, threatening Bald Hills, even then I wouldn't serve in the Russian army. Well, as I was saying, Prince Andrei went on, calming down, now it's the militia. My father is commander-in-chief of the 3rd District, and my only means of avoiding service is to be with him. Which means you do serve. I do, he paused briefly. So why do you serve? Here's why. My father is one of the most remarkable men of his time, but he's getting old, and it's not that he's cruel, but he has all too active a character. He's frightening in the habit of unlimited power, and now with his power bestowed on him by the sovereign as commander-in-chief of the militia. If I had been 2 hours late in a couple of weeks ago, he would have hanged a protocolist in Yukhnovo, Prince Andrei said with a smile. So I serve because no one except for me has any influence on my father, and at some point I may have to save him from an act with which he might suffer later. Ah, well, so you see, yes, mais ce n'est pas comme vous l'entendez. Prince Andrei went on, I never wished, nor do I wish now, any good to that scoundrel of a protocolist who stole some boots from the militiaman. I'd even be very pleased to see him hanged, but I pity my father, that is again myself. Prince Andrei was becoming more and more animated. His eyes shone feverishly all the while he was trying to prove to Pierre that there never was any wish for his neighbor's good in his action. Well, here you want to emancipate the peasants, he went on. That's very good, but not for you. I suppose you've never whipped anyone to death or sent them to Siberia. And still as for the peasants, if they're beaten, whipped, and sent to Siberia, I don't think that makes it any worse for them. In Siberia, he'll go on with his brutish life, and the welts in his body will heal, and he'll be as happy as he was before. But it's needed for those people who are morally ruined, live to repent it, suppress this repentance, and turn course because they have the possibility of punishing justly and unjustly. Those are the ones I pity, and for whose sake I would wish for the emancipation of the peasants. Maybe you haven't seen it, but I've seen good people brought up in the tradition of unlimited power. As they become more irritated over the years, become cruel, coarse, know it, can't help themselves, and become more and more unhappy. Prince Andrei said this with such enthusiasm that it involuntarily occurred to Pierre that these thoughts had been suggested to Prince Andrei by his father. He made no reply. So there's what and whom to be sorry for. Human dignity, peace of conscience, purity, and not their backs and heads, which, however much you whip them and shave them, will still remain the same backs and heads. No, 1,000 times no, I'll never agree with you, said Pierre. In the evening, Prince Andrei and Pierre got into a carriage and drove to Bald Hills. Prince Andrei, glancing at Pierre, broke the silence from time to time with speeches which proved that he was in a good state of mind. Pointing to the fields, he told him about his improvements in management. Pierre was gloomily silent, answered monosyllabically, and seemed to be immersed in his own thoughts. Pierre was thinking about Prince Andrei, that he was unhappy, that he was mistaken, that he did not know the true light, that Pierre had come to his aid to enlighten him and to raise him up. But as soon as Pierre thought of how and what he was going to say, he had the feeling Prince Andrei would discredit his entire teaching with a single word, a single argument, and he was afraid to expose his favorite sacred thing to the possibility of ridicule. No, why do you think, Pierre suddenly began, lowering his head and looking like a budding bull, why do you think that way? You shouldn't think that way. About what? Prince Andrei asked in surprise. About life, about men's purpose. It can't be. I thought the same. And do you know what saved me? Masonry. No, don't smile. Masonry is not a religious, not a ritual sect as I thought. Masonry is the best, the only expression of the best of the eternal sides of mankind. And he began to explain Masonry to the Prince Andrei as he understood it. He said that Masonry is the teaching of Christianity, freed of state and religious fetters. The teaching of equality, brotherhood, and life. Only our holy brotherhood hath real meaning in life. All the rest is the dream, said Pierre. Understand, my friend, that outside this union, everything is filled with lies and falsehood. And I agree with you that an intelligent and good man has nothing left but to live out his life like you, trying not only to bother others, but adopt our basic convictions, join our brotherhood, give yourself to us, let yourself be guided, and you will at once feel yourself, as I did, part of this huge invisible chain, the beginning of which is hidden in heaven, said Pierre. Prince Andrei, looking straight ahead, listened intently to Pierre's speech. A few times he asked Pierre to repeat words he had not heard because of the noise of the carriage. By a particular gleam that lit up in Prince Andrei's eyes, and by his silence, Pierre saw that his words were not in vain, that Prince Andrei would not interrupt him or laugh at what he was saying. They approached a flooded river, which they had to cross by ferry. While the carriage and horses were being loaded, they boarded the ferry. Prince Andrei, leaning his elbow on the rail, looked silently down the floodwaters sparkling in the setting sun. Well, what do you think about that? Asked Pierre. Why are you so silent? What do I think? I've been listening to you, that is all. So, said Prince Andrei, but you say, join our brotherhood, and we'll show you the goal of life and the purpose of man and the laws that govern the world. But who are we? Just people. How do you know everything? How is it that I alone do not see what you see? You see the kingdom of the good and the true on earth, and I don't see it. Pierre interrupted him. Do you believe in a future life, he asked. A future life, Prince Andrei repeated, but Pierre gave him no time to reply, and took this repetition for now, the more so as he knew Prince Andrei's former atheistic convictions. You say you can't see the kingdom of the good and true on earth. I didn't see it either. And it can't be seen if you look at your life as the end of everything. On earth, I mean this earth. Pierre pointed to the fields. There is no truth. Everything is falsehood and evil. But in the universe, in the whole universe, there is the kingdom of the true, and we are now children of the earth, but eternally children of the whole universe. Don't I feel in my soul that I make up a part of that huge harmonious whole? Don't I feel that among the countless numbers of beings in which the divinity, the higher power, whatever you like, is manifest, I make up one link, one step from the lower beings to the higher? If I see clearly this ladder that leads from plant to man, then why should I suppose that this ladder, the lower end of which I do not see, is lost in the plants? Why should I suppose that this ladder stops with me and does not lead further and further to higher beings? I feel not only that I cannot disappear, as nothing disappears in the world, but that I will always be and have always been. I feel that besides me, above me, spirits live, and that in the world there is truth. Yes, that's Herder's teaching, said Prince Andrei, but that, dear heart, does not convince me life and death are what convince me. What convinces me is to see a being dear to you is bound up with you, before whom you were guilty, and hope to vindicate yourself. Prince Andrei's voice quavered, and he turned away. And suddenly, this being suffers, agonizes, and ceases to be. Why? It cannot be that there is no answer. And I believe there is one. That is what convinces. That is what has convinced me, said Prince Andrei. Yes, said Pierre. And isn't that the same thing as what I'm saying? No. All I say is that what convinces one of the necessity of a future life is not arguments, but when one goes through life hand in hand with a person, and suddenly that person disappears there into nowhere, and you yourself stop before the abyss and look into it. And I did look. Well, that's just it. You know there's a there, and there's a somewhere, a someone, there's the future life. That someone is God. Prince Andrei did not reply. The carriage and horses had long been led out on the other side and hitched up, and the sun had already half disappeared, and the evening frost had covered the pools by the crossings with stars. But Pierre and Andrei, to the astonishment of the lackeys, coachmen, and ferrymen, were still standing on the ferry and talking. If there is a God, and if there is a future life, then there is truth, there is virtue, and man's highest happiness consists in striving to attain them. We must live, we must love, we must believe, said Pierre, that we do not live only today on this scrap of earth, but have lived and will live eternally there in all that he pointed to the sky. Prince Andrei stood with his elbow resting on the rail of the ferry, and listening to Pierre, did not take his eyes off the red gleam of the sun on the blue floodwaters. Pierre felt silent. It was completely still. The ferry had long been moored, and only the waves of the current lapped with a faint sound against the ferry's bottom. It seemed to Prince Andrei that this splash of waves made a refrain to Pierre's words, saying, "It's true, believe it." Prince Andrei sat, and with a luminous childlike tender gaze looked into the flushed, rapturous face of Pierre, who still felt timid before his superior friend. "Yes, if only it were so. Anyhow, let's go and get in," Prince Andrei added, and stepping off the ferry, looked at the sky Pierre had pointed to, and for the first time since Austerlitz saw that high eternal sky he had seen as he lay on the battlefield, and something long asleep, something that was best in him, suddenly awakened, joyful and young in his soul. This feeling disappeared as soon as Prince Andrei re-entered the habitual conditions of life, but he knew that this feeling, which he did not know how to develop, lived in him. The meeting with Pierre marked an epoch for Prince Andrei, from which began what, while outwardly the same, was in his inner world, a new life. 13. It was already dusk when Prince Andrei and Pierre drove up to the main entrance of the house at Bald Hills. As they were driving up, Prince Andrei, smiling, drew Pierre's attention to the bustling that was going on by the back porch. A bent old woman with a bundle on her back and a short man dressed in black and with long hair, seeing the carriage drive up, went running back to the gate. Two women ran out after them, and all four, glancing at the carriage, ran fearfully up the back porch. "Those are Masha's people of God," said Prince Andrei. "They took us for father, and this is the only thing in which she doesn't obey him. He orders these wanderers driven away, but she receives them." "But what are these people of God?" asked Pierre. Prince Andrei had no time to answer him. The servants came out to meet them, and he asked them where the old prince was and how soon they expected him. The old prince was still in town, and he was expected at any moment. Prince Andrei took Pierre to his rooms, which always awaited him in perfect order in his father's house, and went himself to the nursery. "Let's go see my sister," said Prince Andrei, returning Pierre. "I haven't seen her yet. She's hiding now and sitting with her people of God. It will serve her right. She'll get embarrassed, but you'll see the people of God." "C'est curieux, ma parole." "Qu'est-ce que people of God?" asked Pierre. "You'll see." Princess Maria indeed became embarrassed and covered with red spots when they came to her. In her cozy room with icon lamps before the icons, a young boy with a long nose and long hair and a monk's cassock was sitting on the sofa beside her at the samovar. In an armchair next to them sat a thin, wrinkled old woman with a meek expression on her childlike face. "André, pourquoi ne pas m'avoir prévenu?" she said in mild reproach, standing in front of her wanderers like a hen in front of her chicks. "Jamais de vos jours? Je suis très content de vous voir," she said to Pierre as he was kissing her hand. She had known him as a child, and now his friendship with Andrei, the misfortune with his wife, and above all his kind, simple face, disposed her towards him. She looked at him with her beautiful, luminous eyes and seemed to be saying, "I like you very much, but please don't laugh at my people." Having exchanged the first phrases of greeting, they sat down. "Ah, Ivanushka's here too," said Prince Andrei, indicating the young wanderer with his smile. "Andrei," Princess Maria said pleadingly, "il faut que vous sachiez que c'est enfin." Andrei said to Pierre. "Andrei, on a les deux," Princess Maria repeated. It was clear that Prince Andrei's mocking attitude towards the wanderers and Princess Maria's useless intercession for them were habitual, well-established relations between them. "Mais, mon bon ami," said Prince Andrei, "vous devrez au contraire mettre consent de ce que je plaque à Pierre votre intime avec ces jeunes gens." "Vraiment?" said Pierre, studying the face of Ivanushka curiously and gravely through his spectacles, for which Princess Maria was especially grateful to him. Realizing that they were talking about him, Ivanushka looked around at them all with cunning eyes. Princess Maria's embarrassment for her people was totally unnecessary. They were not in the least intimidated. The little old woman, her eyes lowered and casting sidelong glances at the newcomers, turned her teacup bottom up on the saucer, and placing the nibbled pieces of sugar beside it, sat calm and motionless in her armchair, waiting to be offered more tea. Ivanushka, sipping from the saucer, looked at the young man from under his brows with his sly feminine eyes. "Where have you been? To Kiev?" Prince Andrei asked the old woman. "So I have, good sir," the old woman replied garrulously. "Just before Christmas, I was deemed worthy to partake of the holy heavenly mysteries with the monks there, and now I'm coming from Kolyazin, where a great blessing has been revealed." "And Ivanushka has come with you?" "I've come on my own, my provider," Ivanushka said, trying to speak in a bass voice. "I met Pelageyushka only in Yukhnovo." All right. Done?
Yeah, you're done.
All right. Solid. Great stuff. Judah it is.
Perfect.
All right.
Here's this. All you have to do is send this information here to that email address.
Okay. Sounds very good.
Perfect. Thank you very much.
All right. Have a good
All
night.
right, you too.
Night. Good luck. Good luck.